I never thought the day they fired my best friend would be the day I discovered my chance to pay them back tenfold. Within weeks, their revenue evaporated like it never existed. Contracts fell one by one like dominoes in a hurricane. And it all started with one tiny detail. They'd forgotten about a detail I'd planted years ago. Waiting. They thought I was just another cog in their machine, processing paperwork and managing supply chains. They had no idea I held the keys to their kingdom, buried deep in the fine print they never bothered to read. My name is Claire Donovan, and for 12 years, I've been the backbone of MedTech Solutions supply chain operations in Chicago. Not the face you'd see in the annual reports, or the voice you'd hear in shareholder meetings, but the one who kept the blood flowing through this corporate body. Every contract, every vendor relationship, every logistics nightmare that threatened to derail our quarterly projections landed on my desk at some point. The 32nd floor of our building had always felt more like home than my actual apartment in Lincoln Park. Maybe that's pathetic, but when you spend 60 hours a week somewhere, watching the seasons change through floor-to-ceiling windows while negotiating million-dollar deals, the line between work and life tends to blur. The gleaming conference rooms with their Italian marble tables, the soft hum of the server room, even the temperamental coffee machine on our floor, they were all part of my ecosystem. But it wasn't the building or the prestige that kept me here. It was the people. We'd built something real among the cubicles and corner offices. Marcus from procurement, who'd covered for me during my mother's cancer treatment without being asked. Sarah from legal, who'd stayed until 2 a.m. helping me untangle a contract dispute that could have cost us our biggest client. And Emily. God, Emily. Emily Hartwell wasn't just our financial manager. She was the reason we'd survived the supply chain crisis of 2020, the semiconductor shortage of 2021, and every budget constraint that corporate threw at us. While other departments hemorrhaged money, Emily could make a dollar stretch like elastic, finding creative solutions that kept us operational when logic said we should have folded. She had this gift for seeing patterns in spreadsheets that others missed, like reading tea leaves, but with pivot tables and cash flow projections. We'd started within 6 months of each other, 2 women in our 20s trying to prove ourselves in an industry dominated by gray-haired men who called us sweetheart in meetings. We'd learned to navigate the unspoken rules together, when to speak up, when to let them think an idea was theirs, how to be twice as good to get half the credit. Every Friday, we'd grab drinks at the bar across the street, dissecting the week's corporate theater over martinis that got progressively stronger as our tolerance for bullshit grew thinner. The company itself was a different story. On paper, MedTech Solutions looked pristine: diversity initiatives, employee wellness programs, values statements plastered on every wall about putting people first. But underneath that polished veneer was the same cutthroat culture you'd find in any corporation where the stock price mattered more than the people who drove it. Promotions went to golf buddies, not top performers. Innovation was praised in town halls, but punished in practice if it threatened someone's fiefdom. And loyalty. That was a one-way street that only flowed upward. I'd watched good people get crushed by this machine over the years. The eager college grads who burned out within 18 months, the middle managers who took the fall for executive mistakes, the veterans who were quietly pushed out before their pensions fully vested. But Emily and I had survived by being indispensable, by knowing where all the bodies were buried, by making ourselves too valuable to lose. Or so we thought. The atmosphere had shifted when Travis Cunningham took over as CEO 8 months ago. Young, aggressive, with an MBA from Wharton and a reputation for transforming companies, which usually meant gutting them and selling the pieces. He'd swept in with his entourage of consultants and yes-men, talking about optimization and synergies, while his dead eyes calculated human resources like entries on a spreadsheet. But we'd weathered leadership changes before. Emily and I had outlasted 4 CEOs, each with their own vision for revolutionizing the company. We knew how to adapt, how to make ourselves essential to the new regime. We'd done it before. We'd do it again. That Tuesday morning in September started like any other. I'd arrived at 7:30, coffee in hand, ready to tackle the Midwest distribution crisis that had been keeping me up at night. The office was already buzzing with its usual energy phones ringing, keyboards clacking, the distant sound of someone arguing with a vendor in conference room C. I should have noticed the signs, the unusual number of closed-door meetings, The way conversations stopped when certain people walked by. The nervous energy that made everyone's laughs a little too loud, their smiles a little too forced. But I was deep in contract negotiations with our biggest supplier, fighting to keep our costs from spiraling out of control. Emily had texted me at 9:15. "Something's up. HR's been in and out of Travis's office all morning. Probably another restructure announcement," I'd replied. "Same shit, different PowerPoint." How wrong I was. How catastrophically, stupidly wrong. The announcement came at 10:45 a.m., delivered through a sterile email with the subject line, "Organizational Optimization Initiative." My stomach dropped as I read the corporate doublespeak. 15% workforce reduction, immediate effect, individual meetings scheduled throughout the day, the kind of language that stripped humanity from the act of destroying lives. I immediately looked across the open floor plan to Emily's desk. She was reading the same email, her face pale but composed. Our eyes met, and she gave me a small, resigned smile. We both knew how this game worked. Finance and supply chain were always safe. We were the ones who kept the lights on, who made sure products moved and bills got paid. They couldn't afford to lose us. The executions began at 11, one by one. People were called into conference room A, the one with frosted glass that didn't quite block the silhouettes of what was happening inside. Jake from marketing came out first, his face blank with shock, carrying a banker's box of his belongings. Then Patricia from customer service, tears streaming down her face as security escorted her to the elevator. "Bloodbath," Marcus whispered as he passed my desk. "They're gutting entire departments." But Emily and I kept working. What else could we do? I had 3 contracts that needed review before end of day, and she was preparing the quarterly financial report. We'd survived every purge before. We were essential. We were safe. At 1:30 p.m., my phone buzzed. Emily. "They want me in conference room A." My fingers froze over my keyboard. No, not Emily. She'd just saved them $8 million by renegotiating our credit terms. She knew every line item in our budget, every financial skeleton in our closet. They needed her. I watched her stand, smooth her blazer, and walk toward the conference room with her head high. Emily never showed fear, not even when the wolves were circling. She'd taught me that never let them see you sweat. Never give them the satisfaction of your panic. 15 minutes, that's all it took to dismantle 12 years of dedication. I couldn't hear what was being said, but I could see Travis through the glass, gesturing with his hands like he was explaining something reasonable, something logical. Emily sat perfectly still, her back straight, nodding occasionally. The HR representative beside Travis looked uncomfortable, shuffling papers, avoiding eye contact. When the door opened, Emily emerged with nothing, no box, no papers, just her purse over her shoulder. Security was already waiting. Company policy terminated. Employees had 5 minutes to collect personal items under supervision. Then immediate escort from the building. No goodbyes, no explanations, no dignity. She stopped at her desk, methodically removing a few personal items, the photo of her nephew, her favorite coffee mug, a small succulent she'd kept alive for 3 years. Her hands were steady, but I saw the slight tremor in her jaw, the way she was holding her breath to keep from breaking. I stood up, ready to say something, anything, but Emily caught my eye and gave the slightest shake of her head. Not here, not in front of them. She knew they were watching, waiting for a scene, for an excuse to paint her as emotional, unstable, difficult. She wouldn't give them that satisfaction. As security walked her to the elevator, I heard Travis's voice behind me. "Claire, could you join us in conference room A?" My blood turned to ice. Were they taking me too? But when I entered, Travis was all smiles, that practiced corporate grin that never reached his eyes. "Don't look so worried," he said, settling into his chair like a king on his throne. "You're safe. In fact, we need you more than ever now. With Emily's departure, we'll need someone to handle the transition, make sure nothing falls through the cracks." Emily's departure. The words tasted bitter. "You mean her termination?" Travis's smile flickered. "We're restructuring the finance department, bringing in fresh perspectives, someone who understands my vision for the company's future." He leaned forward, conspiratorial. "Between us, Emily was too stuck in her ways, too conservative. We need innovative thinking, not someone who just maintains the status quo. Bullshit. Complete, utter bullshit. Emily had been proposing innovations for years: automation systems, blockchain integration for supply chain transparency, AI-driven demand forecasting. But those ideas threatened the old boys club, made them look obsolete. So they buried her proposals and labeled her resistant to change. Who's replacing her? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Brad Morrison. He's coming over from my previous company. Brilliant mind. Really understands modern financial strategies. Brad Morrison. I'd looked him up when Travis first arrived, a 30-something yes-man with an impressive resume that didn't hold up under scrutiny. His successful restructuring at Travis's previous company had ended with a bankruptcy filing 18 months later, but he was Travis's fraternity brother, his golf buddy, his loyal soldier. I'm sure you two will work great together, Travis continued. Brad starts Monday, but in the meantime, I need you to pull all of Emily's files, her passwords, her project notes. We can't afford any disruption in operations. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Travis dismissed me with a wave, already turning to his next victim list. As I walked back to my desk, I saw the vultures already circling Emily's workspace. It, collecting her laptop. Facilities removing her nameplate. My phone vibrated. Emily. Parking garage. 5 minutes. I found her leaning against her car, finally allowing herself to feel the weight of what had happened. For the first time in 12 years, I saw Emily Hartwell cry. 12 years, she whispered. 12 fucking years. And they threw me out like garbage. This isn't over, I said, though I had no idea what I meant. Sue them for what Illinois was an at-will state. Report them to whom Travis had played by the rules, even if the rules were garbage. Emily wiped her eyes, steel returning to her voice. You need to be careful. Claire, Travis is cleaning house, bringing in his own people. You might be safe today. But once Brad learns enough, she didn't need to finish. Once Brad learned the systems, the relationships, the secrets that made our department run, I'd be just as expendable. Maybe 6 months, maybe a year. But my expiration date had already been set. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Emily's face, the controlled devastation, the dignity she maintained even as they stripped everything from her. At 3:20 a.m., I gave up and opened my laptop, needing to do something, anything, to channel the rage burning in my chest. I started pulling Emily's files as Travis had requested, but my mind kept circling back to his smug face, his casual dismissal of 12 years of excellence. Fresh perspectives. The words made me want to punch through my monitor. Emily had kept this company afloat through every crisis, and they'd replaced her with an incompetent fraternity brother who'd driven his last company into the ground. As I transferred Emily's meticulously organized folders, I found myself opening my own contract files. It was almost reflexive whenever I was stressed. I'd review contracts, finding comfort in the precise language, the carefully negotiated terms. These documents were my domain, where every word mattered, where a single comma could mean millions of dollars. That's when I saw it. The Meridian contract, our largest supplier, responsible for 60% of our medical equipment inventory. I'd negotiated this deal 5 years ago, back when I had more autonomy, before the layers of bureaucracy Travis had installed. The main contract was solid, standard, exactly what you'd expect. But there was an addendum, something I'd insisted on after a previous supplier had screwed us during a merger. The termination clause. I read it 3 times to make sure I wasn't imagining things. In the event of material changes to the primary negotiating party's operational status, either party may invoke immediate termination without penalty, provided written notice is delivered within 30 days of said change. The primary negotiating party, that was me. My name was on every signature page, not as an agent of MedTech Solutions, but as Claire Donovan, Supply Chain Director. With personal guarantee provisions I'd added to secure better terms. It was unusual, maybe even unorthodox, but it had saved us 2% on every order, roughly $3 million annually. My heart was pounding as I pulled up our other major contracts. Jensen Logistics, our exclusive shipping partner for the Midwest, my name, my personal guarantee, Hartman Storage Solutions. Handling our warehouse operations, same thing. Even our maintenance contracts with Buildtech Services. All bearing my signature as the primary negotiating party with personal accountability clauses. I'd done this over the years, using my reputation and personal creditworthiness to secure better terms when the company's credit was shaky. The board had loved the savings. Travis's predecessors had praised my initiative, but they'd never really understood what they were signing off on. They saw dollar signs and percentages, not the legal implications of making me personally integral to these agreements. "You beautiful, paranoid genius," I whispered to my younger self. 5 years ago, I'd watched another supply chain director get forced out after securing a massive Dell contract, only to see his replacement take all the credit. That's when I'd started adding these provisions, little insurance policies buried in the legal language that nobody ever read. But knowing I had leverage and using it were two different things. These weren't just contracts. They were relationships I'd built over years. Jim at Meridian, who'd sent flowers when my mother died. Sandra at Jensen, who'd rushed emergency shipments during the pandemic without charging overtime. Could I really blow it all up? I thought about Emily, escorted out like a criminal. I thought about Brad Morrison, who would start Monday, probably already planning how to take credit for Emily's work. I thought about Travis and his fresh perspectives. Yeah, I could blow it all up. I spent the rest of the night documenting everything. Screenshot after screenshot of contracts, correspondence, addendums. I created a detailed timeline showing how these agreements were structured, how my personal involvement was baked into their very foundation. By sunrise, I had a 40-page document that read like a corporate suicide note if I pulled these triggers. MedTech's supply chain would collapse within days. But I needed to be smart about this. Emotional revenge felt good in movies, but this was real life. I had to think 3 moves ahead, like Emily had taught me with her chess metaphors about corporate strategy. Thursday morning, I went to work as normal. I smiled at Travis in the hallway, attended the transition meetings with Brad Morrison, who showed up early to get a head start. He was exactly what I'd expected: slick, confident, and completely out of his depth. He spent more time name-dropping business school professors than asking about our actual operations. "Don't worry about the details," he told me with a patronizing smile. "I'm more of a big-picture guy. You just keep doing what you're doing, and we'll revolutionize this place together." Revolutionize. Right. The man couldn't even find the bathroom without an escort. That afternoon, I did something I'd never done before. I called in a favor from a friend at Harbison Industries, MedTech's biggest competitor. Lisa and I had started our careers together, stayed friends despite working for rival companies. We'd always joked about poaching each other, but there was an unspoken agreement not to cross that line. "Hypothetically," I said over coffee, "if someone with deep supplier relationships wanted to make a change, would Harbison be interested?" Lisa's eyes sharpened. Hypothetically, very interested, especially if that someone could bring those relationships with them. And if MedTech suddenly found themselves without those relationships? She leaned back, studying me. "Claire, what are you planning?" "Justice," I said simply. "They fired Emily to bring in some incompetent crony. They think we're replaceable cogs. I want to show them exactly how wrong they are." Lisa was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Emily Hartwell, the financial genius." When I nodded, her expression hardened. "Those idiots. Okay, hypothetically, if Emily wanted a position, I could make that happen. Senior finance director, full benefits, 20% salary increase, and if someone were to bring over strategic supplier relationships, we could discuss a very generous signing bonus." The pieces were falling into place, but I needed one more thing: timing. Travis was presenting to the board next Friday, his first major quarterly review. He'd be showcasing the successful restructuring and projecting next quarter's numbers based on our existing supply chain. That gave me 1 week to set the charges, 1 week to plant everything perfectly, so that when I pushed the detonator, the explosion would be impossible to contain. I walked back into MedTech that afternoon with a smile that was all teeth. Travis saw me in the lobby and called out, "Claire, you look happy. Good news on the Meridian negotiation." "You could say that," I replied. "Everything's going exactly according to plan." He clapped me on the shoulder, oblivious to the countdown that had already started. 7 days until his world imploded. 7 days until he learned that some cogs were actually linchpins. And when you pulled them out, the whole machine came apart. The irony was delicious. He'd fired Emily for being too conservative, too stuck in her ways. He had no idea he was about to get a lesson in innovation that would make his business school case studies look like nursery rhymes. Friday morning. I arrived at the office at 6:45 a.m., earlier than usual. I needed access to the contract archive room without anyone asking questions. The physical copies of our agreements were stored in climate-controlled filing cabinets that most people forgot existed in our digital age. But I knew better physical documents with original signatures still carried weight in court, especially when digital records could be mysteriously corrupted or deleted. As I pulled file after file, the full scope of my leverage became breathtakingly clear. It wasn't just the major suppliers. Over the years, I'd personally guaranteed dozens of smaller contracts, specialized equipment providers, emergency repair services, even the company that supplied our proprietary packaging. Each one had been negotiated during crisis moments when MedTech's credit was shaky, when my personal reputation was the only thing that got deals across the line. But the real goldmine was hidden in a subsection of the Meridian contract, something I'd almost forgotten about. 3 years ago, during renegotiation, I'd added a key person clause that went beyond simple termination rights. If I left MedTech for any reason, firing, resignation, even retirement, Meridian had the option to immediately recall all equipment on consignment. That was $12 million of inventory sitting in our warehouses that could vanish overnight. The clause had seemed like overkill at the time, but Meridian's CEO, Jim Patterson, had insisted. He'd been burned by corporate musical chairs before, watching solid relationships evaporate when new management came in with their preferred vendors. "I'm doing business with you, Claire, not with MedTech," he'd said. "If you're gone, all bets are off." I photocopied everything, creating 3 sets, one for my lawyer, one for my home safe, and one that would soon find its way to certain interested parties. As I worked, I discovered something else that made my blood run cold. Brad Morrison had already been accessing Emily's files, but he'd also been poking around in mine. AT logs showed he'd attempted to access my contract folders 16 times in the past 2 days, blocked only by my personal encryption. He'd even submitted a request to IT for administrative override, claiming he needed full departmental visibility for strategic planning. The son of a bitch was already planning to replace me. Emily had been right. I probably had weeks, not months, before they manufactured some reason to push me out. Brad would stumble through my job just long enough to think he understood it. Then Travis would decide they needed someone more aligned with the company vision. That afternoon, I watched Brad in what he called a supplier integration meeting, but was really just him Googling industry terms while pretending to take notes. He'd mixed up JIT and EOQ inventory models, confused Net 30 with Net 90 payment terms, and somehow thought our biggest competitor was our subsidiary. Yet Travis sat there nodding like Brad was dispensing wisdom from on high. "Claire," Brad said, his tone suggesting he was about to mansplain my own job to me. "I've been reviewing our supplier contracts, and I think we're leaving money on the table. These personal guarantee provisions you've included, they're unnecessary. They make us look weak, like we can't stand on our corporate credit alone." I kept my expression neutral. Those provisions saved us $3 million last year in better terms. "Short-term thinking," he dismissed with a wave. "We need to project strength. I'm going to recommend to Travis that we renegotiate everything. Clean slate, corporate guarantees only." "That would trigger the change of terms clause in every contract," I said carefully. "We'd have to renegotiate from scratch, and without the personal guarantees, our rates would increase by at least 15%. Brad's smile was condescending. "Claire, I appreciate your concern, but I've done this before. Suppliers respect strength. They'll fall in line." I wanted to laugh. Suppliers didn't respect strength. They respected relationships and reliability. Jim Patterson would eat Brad alive in a negotiation, if he even took his call, but I just nodded, making a note in my phone. Brad planning to void all contracts, document everything. That evening, I met Emily at a bar in Wicker Park, far from the usual corporate hangouts. She looked better rested, maybe even relieved. I got the Harbison offer, she said without preamble. Senior finance director. They want me to start in 2 weeks. That's amazing, I said, genuinely happy for her. You deserve it. Lisa also mentioned you might be joining us, Emily continued, studying me over her martini. Along with some interesting contract migrations. Claire, what are you planning? I pulled out my phone and showed her photos of the key documents. As she read, her eyes widened. Holy shit, you could destroy them. Not destroy, I corrected. Restructure. Give them the innovation they claim to want. Emily was quiet for a moment, then raised her glass. To innovation, then, and to Travis, learning that some people are actually irreplaceable. We spent the next 2 hours refining the plan. Emily knew MedTech's financial pressure points better than anyone, which quarters were crucial, which metrics the board obsessed over, which deals were make or break for Travis's projections. The quarterly board meeting was in 6 days. If contracts started falling apart right before that meeting, if the numbers Travis was about to present suddenly became fiction, he's planning to announce a 15% profit increase based on the restructuring, Emily said. He's already leaked it to some board members to build support. If you pull Meridian alone, that turns into a 20% loss. And if Jensen Logistics goes too, she did quick mental math. 30%, maybe 35% if you factor in the scramble to find alternatives. What about the consignment inventory? Emily's smile was sharp. If Meridian recalls that we'd have to record it as an immediate loss, $12 million hitting the books right before the board meeting, Travis would be done. The board doesn't tolerate that level of miscalculation. We were interrupted by my phone buzzing. An email from Brad Morrison. CCing Travis. Effective Monday. All supplier communications must go through me for approval. We need to ensure consistent messaging as we move forward with strategic realignment. I showed Emily the message. She laughed. Actually laughed. He's cutting you out already. The idiot doesn't even know what he doesn't know. Let him, I said, forwarding the email to my personal account for documentation. In fact, I'll be the perfect team player. I'll hand him everything he wants, every contact, every detail, every rope he needs to hang himself with. Sunday night, I composed an email to Jim Patterson at Meridian, marking it personal and confidential. I didn't send it yet, just saved it in drafts, ready to deploy. The subject line was simple. Regarding our discussion about transition planning. The email itself was carefully crafted, professionally. I could no longer guarantee the terms of our agreement due to structural changes at MedTech. Personally, I wanted to ensure Meridian's interests were protected during this transition. I would understand completely if they chose to exercise their options under Section 15.3.2 of our agreement. I created similar emails for every major supplier, each referencing specific clauses, each offering them an out that would benefit them while destroying MedTech's quarterly projections. I wasn't betraying anyone. These were their contractual rights. I was just reminding them of their options. Monday would be the beginning of the end. Brad would start his grand strategic realignment. Having no idea that the foundation was already crumbling, Travis would continue preparing his triumphant board presentation, oblivious to the fact that every number would be obsolete by Friday. They wanted innovation. They were about to get it. Monday morning arrived like the calm before a hurricane. I walked into the office with a banker's box of personal items that actually contained copies of every critical document, every email trail, every piece of evidence that would cover me legally for what was about to happen. If anyone asked, I was just organizing my desk. Brad had commandeered Emily's old office over the weekend, already redecorating with his diplomas and motivational posters. Excellence is not a skill, it's an attitude. Read one. I wondered if he'd feel the same way when excellence meant understanding the contracts you were about to lose. At 9 a.m. sharp, he called a department meeting. I want to thank Claire for maintaining things during this transition, he began, as if I were a temporary babysitter. Moving forward, I'll be implementing a new strategic framework for supplier management. We're going to modernize, streamline, and optimize. I nodded along, taking notes I'd never need. Brad outlined his vision-aggressive renegotiation, new competitive bidding processes, leveraging corporate synergies. It was a masterclass in MBA buzzword bingo. completely divorced from the reality of how our supply chain actually functioned. "I'll need all supplier contact information transferred to me by end of day," he concluded. "Claire, you'll continue handling day-to-day operations while I focus on strategy." "Of course," I replied smoothly. "I'll send everything over. Fair warning though, Jim Patterson at Meridian prefers face-to-face meetings. He's old school, doesn't really do email." Brad waved dismissively. "He'll adapt. Everyone does business digitally now." I bit my tongue. Jim Patterson was 63 years old, ran a $2 billion company, and had told me explicitly that he'd never do business with some PowerPoint jockey who thinks a spreadsheet is a relationship. But Brad would learn that soon enough. That afternoon, I made my first real move. I called Jim directly from my personal phone. "Claire was wondering when I'd hear from you. Heard about the changes over there. Emily getting canned was bullshit." "It was," I agreed. "Jim, I need to be transparent with you. There are going to be more changes, big ones. Brad Morrison is taking over supplier relationships, and he's planning to renegotiate everything." There was a long pause. "This Morrison, he's the guy who tanked Springfield Medical's supply chain." Of course Jim had done his homework. "The same. And they put him in charge of my account." His voice had gone dangerously quiet. "Claire, you know I only kept this contract because of you. That personal guarantee clause wasn't just paperwork." "I know. That's why I'm calling. Whatever happens, I wanted you to hear it from me first. And Jim, you might want to review section 15.3.2 of our agreement, the key person clause." "Already did. Soon as I heard Emily was gone. Been waiting for your call. You leaving?" "Let's say I'm exploring options." "Harbison." When I didn't deny it, he chuckled. "Good for you. Lisa's smart. She'll treat you right. As for my contract with MedTech," he paused meaningfully. "Well, if you're not there, I don't see why I should be either. I'm not asking you to do anything, Jim, just giving you a heads up." "Appreciated. By the way, that consignment inventory might be a good time for an audit. Make sure everything's accounted for before any transitions." After Jim, I called Sandra at Jensen Logistics, then Paul at Hartman Storage. Each conversation was carefully orchestrated. I never asked them to pull their contracts, never suggested they should leave. I just informed them of the situation, reminded them of their rights, and let them draw their own conclusions. By Wednesday, I'd reached out to every major supplier. Most were appalled at Emily's firing, furious about Brad's appointment, and very interested in their contractual options. The smart ones started requesting inventory audits, updating their terms of service, and copying legal on their correspondence, all standard procedures that would nonetheless send red flags up the corporate ladder. Brad, meanwhile, was obliviously confident. He'd sent an introduction email to all suppliers that was so generic it could have been written by ChatGPT. Several forwarded it to me with laughing emojis. Jim Patterson's response was particularly brutal. "Mr. Morrison, I've been in this business for 40 years. I don't need a lecture on supply chain innovation from someone who thinks JIT stands for just in time to fail. Direct all correspondence through Claire Donovan until further notice." Thursday morning, things started accelerating. Brad stormed into my office, face red. "What the hell did you tell Patterson? He's refusing to take my calls." "I told you he prefers face-to-face meetings," I said innocently. "Maybe try visiting him in person." "I don't have time for that. The board meeting is tomorrow, and Travis needs confirmation that all supplier relationships are stable." "Are they not?" I asked, maintaining perfect confusion. I haven't heard anything concerning. That was technically true. I hadn't heard anything. I'd orchestrated it. Brad jabbed a finger at his laptop. "Jensen Logistics is requesting a comprehensive contract review. Hartman wants to renegotiate storage rates. 3 secondary suppliers have asked for immediate payment of outstanding invoices. What the fuck is happening?" "Market dynamics," I suggested. "Suppliers get nervous during restructuring. It's normal." "Fix it," he demanded. "Call them. Smooth it over. Tell them everything's fine." "I'd love to help," I said carefully. "But you explicitly stated all supplier communication goes through you now. I wouldn't want to overstep." His face went from red to purple. "This is not the time for petty bullshit. Claire." "It's not petty," I replied calmly. "It's protocol. Your protocol. But if you want to formally reverse that directive, I'll need it in writing, for liability purposes." He stormed out, presumably to complain to Travis. I turned back to my computer and opened my draft folder. 14 emails sat there, waiting. Each one a carefully worded notification to a supplier about my change in operational status. Each one triggering various clauses that would unravel MedTech's supply chain like a cheap sweater. I looked at the clock, 2:15 p.m. The board meeting was in 18 hours. Travis would walk in thinking he was about to crown himself king of the restructuring. Instead, he'd be walking into an ambush he'd created himself. That evening, I met Emily for dinner. "Tomorrow?" she asked. "Tomorrow morning, 8:45 a.m., 15 minutes before the board meeting starts. And you're sure you're protected legally?" I pulled out a folder. My lawyer reviewed everything. Every action I'm taking is within my contractual rights. Hell, some of these clauses require me to notify suppliers of status changes. I'd be in breach if I didn't send these emails. Emily smiled. The first real smile I'd seen from her since the firing. "You know what the beautiful irony is? If they'd kept me, I could have found a way to minimize the damage, restructured the debt, negotiated payment plans, maybe saved half the contracts. But Brad, he won't even understand what's happening until it's too late." We toasted to that, to competence unrecognized, to loyalty unrewarded, and to the spectacular disaster that was about to unfold. Travis wanted to run MedTech like a startup, fast and reckless. He was about to learn why supply chains required patience, relationships, and respect for the people who actually knew what they were doing. Tomorrow morning, I'd push send on 14 emails. By lunch, MedTech's quarterly projections would be fantasy. By close of business, Travis would be fighting for his professional life. They'd fired my friend, now I was going to fire their profits. Friday morning, 8:43 a.m. I sat at my desk, laptop open, 14 emails queued and ready. Through the glass walls of the executive conference room, I could see the board members gathering 12 people in expensive suits who controlled MedTech's fate. Travis was already there, setting up his presentation, his body language radiating confidence. Brad stood beside him, nodding along like an eager puppy. 8:44 a.m. My phone buzzed, a text from Emily. "Watching the stock ticker. Good luck." I pulled up the email client, cursor hovering over the send button. Each message was timestamped to go out simultaneously. Meridian, Jensen, Hartman, BuildTech, and 10 others. Professional, legally precise notifications of my change in operational status and their contractual options. 8:45 a.m. I clicked send. The emails disappeared from my draft folder, winging their way through cyberspace to executives who'd been waiting for them. Jim Patterson later told me he'd been refreshing his inbox since 8:30, ready to act the moment my message arrived. 8:47 a.m. My phone started buzzing. Jim's response was first, acknowledged, initiating immediate contract review per section 15.3.2. Consignment audit team dispatched to your warehouses. ETA 90 minutes. 8:48 a.m. Sandra from Jensen. Received. Suspending all shipments pending contract renegotiation. Please direct all inquiries to legal. 8:50 a.m. My desk phone rang. It was Roger from Warehouse Operations. Panic in his voice. "Claire, what the hell is happening? Meridian just showed up with a team saying they're pulling all consignment inventory. They have paperwork. Is this real?" "It's real," I confirmed. "They're exercising their contractual rights. Give them full cooperation and document everything." "But that's $12 million in inventory. We have orders going out today." "Not anymore, we don't." 8:55 a.m. Brad burst into my office, phone pressed to his ear, face pale. "What did you do? What did you do?" I pulled up the email thread and turned my screen toward him. "I fulfilled my legal obligation to notify suppliers of changes in my operational status. As you made clear on Monday, you're now handling all supplier relationships. These are yours to manage now." He read the emails, his face cycling through confusion, understanding, and horror. You can't. This is sabotage." "This is contract law," I corrected. "Every clause I'm triggering was approved by legal, signed by the previous CEO, and countersigned by the board. I included these provisions to protect MedTech's interests. The fact that they also protected mine was just forward thinking. 9:05 a.m. Through the glass, I could see Travis at the podium, clicking through his slides. The board members were nodding, impressed by his projections. His phone sat face down on the table, missing the flood of urgent messages undoubtedly pouring in. Brad was frantically calling suppliers, getting voicemail or polite refusals to discuss anything without legal present. "Fix this," he hissed at me between calls. "You know these people, make it stop." "I no longer have authority to negotiate on MedTech's behalf," I reminded him. "That's your job now. Besides, I'll be taking some personal time. I've accrued about 6 weeks of vacation." 9:15 a.m. The first visible crack appeared. Travis's assistant rushed into the board meeting, leaning down to whisper urgently in his ear. I saw his confident smile falter. He excused himself, stepping out to check his phone. Even from across the floor, I could see his face drain of color as he scrolled through the messages. 9:20 a.m. Chaos. Travis stormed back into the conference room, trying to maintain composure while board chairman Patricia Williams demanded an explanation. Through the glass, I could see him gesturing frantically, pulling up his phone, his carefully rehearsed presentation forgotten. Roger from warehousing called again. "Claire, Meridian's trucks are here. They're taking everything. I need authorization to stop them." "You need to let them take it," I said loud enough for Brad to hear. "It's their property under the consignment agreement. Stopping them would be theft." Brad dropped his phone. $12 million. 12.3. Actually, plus Jensen is suspending shipments, which means we can't fulfill about $8 million in orders scheduled for next week. Hartman wants their storage facilities cleared within 72 hours, or they'll charge triple rates. Oh, and those secondary suppliers who wanted immediate payment. That's another $4 million due today, or they cut us off. 9:30 a.m. The board meeting had devolved into crisis management. I could see Patricia Williams standing now, pointing at Travis, her body language screaming fury. Other board members were on their phones, presumably calling their assistants, their lawyers, their brokers to dump stock before the news went public. My email dinged. A message from Lisa at Harbison. "Heard through the grapevine that MedTech is having supply chain issues. We'd be happy to take over any contracts that need new management. Also, your start date is approved for 2 weeks from Monday. Welcome to the team." 9:45 a.m. Travis appeared in my office doorway, Brad trailing behind him like a whipped dog. "You're fired," Travis said, his voice shaking with rage. "Clear out your desk. Security will escort you out." "Perfect timing," I replied, pulling out a printed resignation letter dated yesterday. "Though technically, I'm resigning, effective immediately. My lawyer will be in touch about my severance package, accumulated vacation payout, and the early vesting of my stock options per my employment contract." "You planned this?" It wasn't a question. "I executed a strategic restructuring," I said, using his own language. "Optimized my personal outcomes while maintaining full legal compliance. I believe you call that innovation." 10 a.m. Security arrived to escort me out. I'd already packed everything important, leaving only the motivational posters Brad had gifted the department. As we walked through the office, I saw the news already spreading, accounting frantically recalculating quarterly projections, sales trying to explain to customers why orders wouldn't ship, legal huddled in emergency session. In the elevator, one of the security guards, Tom, who I'd known for 8 years, whispered, "Heard what they did to Emily. Good for you, Claire." 10:15 a.m. I stood in the parking garage, breathing fresh air for the first time in what felt like years. My phone had dozens of messages, suppliers confirming their contract suspensions, former colleagues asking what happened, Emily sending champagne emojis. But the best message came at 10:30 a.m., forwarded from someone still inside. "Emergency board meeting minutes, motion to terminate CEO Travis Cunningham, effective immediately. Approved 11-1. Motion to pursue legal action for gross mismanagement. Approved unanimous." I sat in my car, watching the building I'd spent 12 years in grow smaller in my rearview mirror. In 2 weeks, I'd start at Harbison with a 40% raise and a signing bonus that would make Travis weep. Emily was already there, building something better. As for MedTech, by Monday, their stock would tank 30%. By Wednesday, 3 major customers would jump ship to Harbison. by the end of the quarter, they'd post their first loss in 5 years. All because they thought loyalty was weakness and people were replaceable. The truth is, everyone's replaceable, but some replacements cost more than others. Travis had saved Emily's salary and got Brad instead. That decision just cost them $50 million and counting. I pulled out of the parking garage and into the bright Chicago morning. My phone rang. Jim Patterson. Claire, heard you're going to Harbison. Want to discuss moving Meridian's contract over there? I think we can offer even better terms without all that medtech bureaucracy. I'd love to discuss it, I said, already calculating the commission on a deal that size. How about Monday? It's a date. And Claire, that was beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. Yes, it was. The weekend passed in a blur of phone calls and meetings. Every major supplier wanted to know what had happened, where I was going, and whether their contracts could follow me to Harbison. By Sunday night, I'd effectively orchestrated the migration of $40 million in annual business from MedTech to my new employer, all without violating a single non-compete clause. Since I hadn't officially started yet, and the suppliers were making their own independent decisions, Monday morning brought the news I'd been expecting. MedTech's stock opened down 22%. The financial press was having a field day. Medical supply giant faces crisis. After mass contract cancellations, read the Wall Street Journal. CEO terminated after supply chain catastrophe, announced Bloomberg. But the real beauty was in the details. A forensic accounting review, ordered by the panic-stricken board, had uncovered the full extent of Brad Morrison's incompetence at his previous company. Turns out his successful restructuring had involved hiding losses through creative accounting that bordered on fraud. The SEC was now interested in both Brad and Travis's previous dealings. Emily called me at 2:30 p.m., barely able to contain her laughter. You need to see this. Someone leaked Travis's termination meeting recording. She sent me a link to an anonymous upload. The board's chairman, Patricia Williams, was systematically destroying Travis. You hired your unqualified friend, fired our best financial manager, and ignored warnings from every department head. Your ego and cronyism have cost this company $50 million in a single quarter. Travis's defense was pathetic. Claire Donovan sabotaged us. She orchestrated this. Claire Donovan, Patricia's voice was ice cold, used contractual provisions that you should have known about, that Brad Morrison should have reviewed, that any competent executive would have identified as critical risk factors. She didn't sabotage anything, she simply stopped protecting you from your own incompetence. Tuesday afternoon, I got a call from an unexpected source, Marcus from procurement, still at MedTech. Claire, you're not going to believe this. They've brought in emergency consultants to try to salvage the supply chain. Guess how much they're charging? Tell me. $800,000 a month, minimum 6-month contract. They're literally paying millions to maybe get back to where we were before Travis's innovation. Oh, and they've offered Emily $200,000 to consult for 3 months, just to unfuck Brad's mess. Did she take it? She countered with $350,000 and they accepted immediately. She's using the money to fund a scholarship program for female finance students. Wednesday brought more delicious developments. Brad Morrison had been escorted from the building after attempting to blame everything on inadequate documentation from Emily and me. His LinkedIn profile, which had proudly announced his position as CFO of MedTech just a week ago, now listed him as seeking new opportunities. The best part. Someone had screenshot his earlier post about bringing revolutionary financial strategies to outdated industries, and it was going viral in finance circles as a cautionary tale of hubris. Thursday's news was even better. 3 of MedTech's board members had resigned. Citing loss of confidence in organizational judgment, Patricia Williams had taken over as interim CEO and immediately announced a return to relationship-based business practices and a comprehensive review of recent personnel decisions. But the real vindication came in her public statement. MedTech deeply regrets the recent departure of key personnel whose expertise and relationships were fundamental to our success. We are committed to rebuilding the trust and partnerships that were damaged by short-sighted decision-making. She didn't name names, but everyone knew she meant Emily and me. Jim Patterson called that afternoon. Did you see MedTech's quarterly report? Not yet. 62% revenue drop. Largest quarterly loss in company history. They're having to sell off 2 divisions just to maintain cash flow. At this rate, there'll be a takeover target within 6 months. Maybe Harbison should acquire them, I suggested. We could probably get them cheap. Jim laughed. Funny you should mention that. Lisa's already running the numbers. Turns out buying a broken company and fixing it might be cheaper than competing with it. Friday arrived with a final, perfect piece of poetic justice. A business news program was doing a segment on the MedTech meltdown, a case study in management failure. They'd somehow gotten security footage of Emily being escorted out, juxtaposed with Travis's confident presentation to the board just days later, followed by stock charts showing the catastrophic collapse. The expert commentator was brutal. This is what happens when relationships are viewed as replaceable, when loyalty is seen as weakness, and when ego overrides expertise. MedTech learned a $50 million lesson: some employees aren't just workers. They're load-bearing walls. Remove them, and the whole structure collapses. That evening, Emily and I met for champagne at the same bar where we'd planned this entire operation. The place was packed with MedTech refugees. The company had announced another round of layoffs to cut costs. "Any regrets?" Emily asked. I thought about it. 12 years of my life, relationships built, late nights, missed birthdays, all for a company that had thrown us away like garbage. Did I regret burning it down? None, I said. They made their choice. They decided we were expendable. We just showed them how wrong they were. You know they're calling you the contract killer in business school case studies now. Emily laughed. Apparently, 3 universities are already using this as an example of key person risk and the importance of institutional knowledge. My phone buzzed with a news alert. MedTech announces emergency shareholder meeting to discuss potential sale. Below that, another alert. Harbison Industries confirms interest in strategic acquisitions in medical supply sector. I raised my glass. To Travis and Brad, may they get exactly what they deserve. And what's that? Emily asked. Each other. I heard they're starting a consulting firm together. Innovative business solutions or some bullshit like that. We laughed until our sides hurt. 2 guys who destroyed a 50-year-old company in less than a month were going to teach others how to run businesses. The market would eat them alive. My phone rang. Lisa from Harbison. Claire, I know you don't officially start until Monday, but the board just approved the MedTech acquisition offer. We're going to buy them for 30 cents on the dollar. I want you leading the integration team. You know where all the bodies are buried. I'll want Emily on the team too. Already assumed. Oh, and Claire, first order of business will be reviewing all former personnel decisions. We might find that some terminations were ill-advised, might need to reverse them. I hung up and looked at Emily. How do you feel about buying our old company? Her smile was pure satisfaction. I think it's the perfect ending. We're going to walk back in there as owners, not employees. And Travis and Brad. Who? Oh, you mean the case studies in what not to do. They're irrelevant now. Just footnotes in a story about how 2 women they discarded ended up buying the company they destroyed. The bar's TV was showing the evening business report. MedTech's logo appeared with a downward arrow and the headline, "From Industry Leader to Cautionary Tale, the MedTech Collapse." I turned away from the screen. That was the past. Monday. I'd walk into Harbison Industries as Senior Vice President of Supply Chain Strategy, with a mandate to absorb MedTech's remains into our operations. Emily would be right beside me as Chief Financial Strategist. They'd fired my friend, so I'd fired their profits, and now we were buying their corpse. It was beautiful. 6 months later, I stood in the executive conference room of what used to be MedTech Solutions, now officially a subsidiary of Harbison Industries. The same room where Travis had delivered his catastrophic board presentation. The same room where Patricia Williams had terminated him. Now it was mine to command. The acquisition had been completed for even less than projected 28 cents on the dollar. MedTech's board had practically begged Harbison to take them off their hands. The integration was nearly complete, and I'd kept my promise to protect the good people who'd been caught in the crossfire. Marcus, Roger, and most of the original team were not only retained but promoted. Emily walked in, carrying a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. Guess who just called me? If you say Travis, I might actually die laughing. Close. Brad Morrison. He wanted to know if we had any consulting opportunities available. Said he'd be willing to take a significant pay cut for the chance to work with industry leaders like us. I took the glass she offered. What did you tell him? I told him we don't hire people who tank companies through incompetence and then blame others for their failures. Then I suggested he try applying at companies we compete with, as a favor to us. We clinked glasses, looking out at the Chicago skyline from the office that had once belonged to Travis. His motivational posters were long gone, replaced with actual business metrics and, in one corner, a small framed photo of Emily and me from our first day at the old medtech, young and eager and having no idea what the next 12 years would bring. Did you see the Harvard Business Review article? Emily asked. The contract clause that destroyed a company. Yeah, they called it the most elegant corporate revenge in modern business history. They interviewed Travis for it. He still claims we conspired against him, that it was unethical. Unethical, I repeated, savoring the irony. He fired you to give your job to his incompetent friend, and we're unethical for using legal contracts to protect ourselves. My phone buzzed with a calendar reminder. 4:15 p.m. final integration meeting, the last official act of absorbing MedTech into Harbison. After today, MedTech Solutions would cease to exist as an independent entity. 50 years of corporate history ended. You know what the best part is? Emily said, reading the same notification. We didn't set out to destroy them. We just wanted fairness, justice. They destroyed themselves through arrogance and stupidity. She was right. Every decision Travis and Brad made after our departures had accelerated their downfall. They could have minimized the damage, could have negotiated with suppliers, could have hired competent replacements. Instead, they doubled down on their mistakes, blamed everyone else, and ultimately handed us their company for pennies. The meeting was brief, papers signed, assets transferred, the last remnants of MedTech's independence erased. As the lawyers filed out, Patricia Williams stopped beside me. She'd stayed on as an advisor during the transition, one of the few board members with enough integrity to help clean up the mess. She said quietly, I voted against hiring Travis. I knew he was wrong for the company, but I let myself be overruled. Chose board harmony over doing what was right. That's on me. You fired him when it counted, I offered. Too late to save the company, though. She looked around the conference room. In 40 years of business, I've never seen someone dismantle a company so thoroughly, so legally, so elegantly. You didn't break a single law, violate a single ethical principle, or even raise your voice. You just let go, stopped holding everything together, and it all fell apart. They thought the company ran itself, I said. They forgot that someone has to hold the threads. Patricia nodded and left. Emily and I were alone in what was once the heart of MedTech's power. Want to know something funny? Emily pulled out her phone, showing me a LinkedIn post. Travis's consulting firm just folded. 3 months. That's all it lasted. Turns out nobody wants to hire consultants who are famous for destroying a billion-dollar company through sheer incompetence. I scrolled through the comments. The business community was brutal. Travis Cunningham had become a verb to Cunningham, meant to destroy something valuable through ego and ignorance. He'll never work in this industry again, Emily said. Neither will Brad. They're radioactive. Good. We gathered our things, taking one last look at the space that had been both our prison and our battlefield. As we walked to the elevator, we passed the wall where employee photos once hung. Mine and Emily's had been removed the day we left, erased as if we'd never existed. Now, our photos hung in Harbison's main lobby, part of the executive team display. Claire Donovan, Senior Vice President, Supply Chain Strategy, and Emily Hartwell, Chief Financial Strategist. We'd gone from erased to elevated, from discarded to dominant. The elevator doors opened, and we stepped inside. As we descended, I thought about all the mornings I'd ridden this same elevator, building something I thought mattered, only to learn I was just a disposable cog to them. But I wasn't a cog, I was a foundation stone, and when they knocked me out, the whole building came crashing down. The doors opened to the lobby, now bearing Harbison Industries branding. The security guard was Tom, the same one who'd escorted me out 6 months ago. Ms. Donovan, Ms. Hartwell, he said with genuine warmth. Have a great evening. You too. Tom, by the way, did you get the integration bonus? Yes, ma'am. Thank you for making sure security was included. MedTech never would have done that. That's why MedTech doesn't exist anymore, Emily said simply. We walked out into the Chicago evening, the city lights beginning to twinkle. My phone had one last message, from Jim Patterson. Dinner tomorrow to celebrate my treat. You two pulled off the business comeback of the century. I showed it to Emily. Dinner with Jim. Absolutely. But tonight, I just want to go home, pour a large glass of wine, and appreciate the beautiful symmetry of it all. The symmetry. They fired me to save money and maintain their power. Now we own their company. Their jobs are gone, and their reputations are destroyed. If that's not poetic justice, I don't know what is. I thought about Travis, probably sitting in his apartment, scrolling through job postings that would never respond to his applications. About Brad, whose resume would forever include the MedTech disaster. About all the executives who thought loyalty was weakness and people were replaceable. They'd learned the hard way that some people aren't just employees. We're the invisible forces that keep companies alive, ignore us, and things continue, disrespect us, and things stumble, but betray us, discard us like garbage. That's when you learn we weren't holding things up, we were holding things together. And when we let go, when we stop protecting you from your own incompetence, when we decide to use every legal tool at our disposal to demonstrate our true value, that's when profits die, companies crumble, empires fall. They fired my friend, so I fired their profits. And it was beautiful. I closed my laptop, leaned back in my chair, and smiled. Thank you so much for listening to this story of corporate justice and sweet revenge. I hope you enjoyed following Claire's journey as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. Are you tuning in from your office? Perhaps plotting your own corporate comeback? Or maybe you're unwinding after dealing with your own Travis. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and share your thoughts about this story. Have you ever witnessed or experienced something similar in your workplace? Let's discuss in the comments below. Your stories and perspectives make this community amazing. Until next time, remember, know your worth, document everything, and never underestimate the power of a well-written contract.